Hello everyone and welcome back to Dorm Room Ventures. Today I'm joined by Soham Mehra, who is a Virginia Tech graduate who co-founded Morph Labs, which is a startup building next-gen prosthetics using AI and brain-computer interface technology. Soham started Morph while he was still a student at Virginia Tech, and today he's working on it full-time with his co-founders. In this episode, Soham is here to walk us through what it really looks like to take risks as a student founder. We're diving into how taking risks in college differs from post-grad life risks, how to decide when to go all in on an idea, and what it means to make bold decisions while the stakes are constantly changing. Soham has taken some huge leaps, whether it was starting Morph in school, navigating the early unknowns of building a deep tech product, or taking the biggest risk of all, choosing to pursue Morph full-time after graduation, turning down corporate job offers, PhD programs, and other high-profile opportunities. If you're a student wondering when to bet on yourself, this episode is for you. All right, enough talk. Let's get straight into it. All right, so thank you so much for being on Dorm Room Ventures. It's absolutely splendid to have you on the show. Really excited about this episode, man. Thank you again.
Yeah, thank you so much, Zaki, for having me. I'm excited for what's to come.
Of course. This is a very long-awaited episode, the idea of navigating risk. When you think about a student entrepreneur, one of the first things that comes to mind is risk-taking, right? And it's been so many episodes in and we haven't even touched on it. So this is wonderful. However, before going into the main gist of what we want to talk about, as I do with everyone, I want you to give a brief background on yourself and your experience with navigating risk and let listeners know a little bit more about Morph, which is a startup that you and co-founders are currently working on.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name's Soham. I'm a May 2025 graduate out of the Virginia Tech ISC program. Back in August, I started this company with my two co-founders, Nick David and Pranay Reddy, to build the next generation of brain foundational models, helping encode EEG data into motor output, and first starting with the people that need it the most, the amputees. And obviously, risk is a big part of that, both, in the day-to-day decisions that we make, but also in choosing to pursue this full-time. All of us turned down full-time job offers, PhD offers to come work on this. So evaluating, analyzing risk, taking that leap has been a big part of the decision that we made.
Definitely. And being able to take that risk really shows a level of understanding on how to take risk on your end, which is wonderful. This is why I wanted you to have on the show for this topic. So kind of segueing into this, let's talk a little bit about what risk looks like for a student founder, right? So what kind of risks do student entrepreneurs typically face? From your experience and what you've heard from others, typically what do student founders run into when things get serious?
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually am of the belief, which is funny you brought me on for this, that while you're a student, there is no harm in trying. Initially it seems like, oh, there's a little bit of a monetary risk, having to put a little bit of money down, make your, incorporate your company and all of this stuff. But in the grand scheme of things, if what you build actually takes off, that's very, very small, right? It's a couple $100 for incorporating the company, making it real, and then you can start working on it while you're a student. If you are wildly successful, right, then comes another risk of either, evaluating whether or not you want to drop out or, taking this full time as opposed to taking a job off for an internship. But while you're in school, I'm of the belief that this is something, everybody should do, everybody should try. Worst comes to worst, you end up with a pretty cool resume project and become more attractive to employers. But the big step comes from, oh, I've graduated. Do I take this full time or do I, say goodbye and go take well, maybe not cushy, but go take the employment job that's secure?
And so going off of that, would you say that students tend to overestimate the risks that are involved when running a startup in college?
Absolutely. I mean, if I had to go back freshman year, I would have told myself, go build, try something, right? Worst case scenario, it's an absolute fail and I still have 4 more years to do whatever I want, right? And that holds until you go on and on and on and until you graduate. If I have, because not to say college is a playground, but it's one of those environments where people are willing to throw money at you for almost, no regard. You can apply for small $1,000 grants here and there. You can travel to do other pitch competitions. And if your idea has a semblance of a possibility, they'll put money down. And, everybody talks about, oh, big change, very, very risky. but I would argue it's probably the least risky thing you can do as a college student is try to build something yourself, right? As opposed to going through the interview cycle where the fate of your professional career is in somebody else's hands.
Right, right. And kind of going off of that, I just wanted to hear from your experience, how has, and we're going to jump a little bit more into this later on, but how have you seen kind of on a top level view the risks change going from college where you talk about how there are very little risks to now post grad, in a completely new environment?
Yeah, absolutely. So making that switch is it goes from, experimenting and trying things around, getting the free money where I can, that's all non-dilutive, which was, a very realistic and common opportunity being an undergrad, to now, oh, it becomes about survival, right? We have to set ourselves up to ensure that we can go and build out our product, start making sales. So we need to give ourselves as much building time as possible and be able to survive where we don't have to worry constantly. So that becomes the focus. Can
Hmm.
we buy ourselves enough time to make something happen? And that's the risk at hand, right? Is there a possibility for us to go under and not give ourselves building time, right?
Right. Yeah, and when you put in those words, when it's all about survival, that really it really hits you. You really start to understand how immense the risks get as you move after college. And so I wanted to dive more into the topic you had about taking risks in college. What are the advantages of taking risks while in college? I know you talked a little bit about them, but if you had a student in front of you and they were asking you why should I take risks in college, what would you tell them?
So, a few things. One is sheer amount of resources that are made available to you as a college student, right? You have money, you have faculty, labs, although I would be careful with that with, IP that the university might take if you build something using a lot of their resources. But they will, there's tons of non-dilutive grant funding that you can get. Most entrepreneurship centers, for example, like Virginia Tech's, right? They will pay for you to actually go to other pitch competitions. They'll pay for you to attend conferences, right? At no expense to yourself. So you can actually get in front of customers. You can get in front of people who would throw down funding for you, and the university will cover that, with no rights to your company at all. And so that's there. The second is the fact that you're a student. Almost everyone is willing to set up time with you and help you learn and grow. Everybody's willing to give out advice. You can take full advantage of that. Cold emails with the vt.edu address or any university address will hit a lot better when you're asking for help as opposed to something else. You're a student, you're young, you're hungry, everybody's going to want to help you succeed. And so those are like the two big things that I think are unmatched when you're trying to take a leap in college.
No, definitely. And I love that you say that because I find it interesting. I've personally talked to students that find it hard to begin that cold outreach in just general networking with higher ups wherever they want to go in regards to their career path. Interestingly enough, this same point that you bring up about people loving to reach out to students and hearing from them is the same topic I talked about with Rajiv Mehta in a past episode on VC. He had the same point. People love hearing from students, people that are hungry. It's more about getting out of your own shell as a student and realizing that people are there to help you. That's what's needed to take that leap. I love that you mentioned that. And stepping out of college, you mentioned, it's all about survival after that, right? Things get really real when you move out of that bubble of campus life, right?
Right.
However, I wanted to hear because I'm curious, are there risks that are potentially better suited for after graduation, or is it all kind of better on the college side?
So the big risk I would say, right, is the monetary feasibility of you being able to do whatever you want, right? I mean, if and with most cases, this is not a direct translation, but if more money is the issue, like if you can make your idea happen, then with more money, then the financial risk is basically the only thing. How can we, with as little money as possible, get as much business progress as possible and also survive,
Hmm.
right? I mean, it's not just all the money, grant funding, and everything is going into the company development and all of that stuff, but it's also, food on the table and a roof over our head. So in that sense, things are a lot more serious. But on the flip side, especially if it's something technical, it's something that we encountered a little bit initially is while we were all students. I mean, the technology that we're building at Morph is It's not a typical undergrad level assignment. There's PhD researchers and full-time, faculty, the leaders in academia that are also trying to find and develop similar solutions who have, years of subject matter expertise. So as a student, gaining technical credibility and validity, that's sometimes harder than actually after the fact. Once you're fully, head first, you dove in.
Definitely. And I want to just touch on that in your work that you do at Morph a little bit more. You know, I want to hear about how you and your co-founders came about working on Morph. And also, I'm curious, you mentioned you have so many people in this field that have so much more subject matter expertise. How do you stay ahead in that ever-changing and evolving field?
Yeah, absolutely. So me and my two co-founders, we were two engineers, myself and one more, and then we have a sales and strategy co-founder as well. It was kind of a unique coming together of personalities and experience. I myself had experience doing AI/ML for medical device companies. I did public health research while I was at Virginia Tech, also doing software engineering. So very much the software for healthcare and devices was my background. My other engineering co-founder, he had done materials research at a dark matter lab, and he also did biomechanics research when he was in his undergrad at FSU. And so he had very much the way the physical body moves, the motor control expertise background. And then my third co-founder, he had direct experience with those who could benefit from augmented motor control, right, with robotics and EEG and the work we're doing. And so when he was in high school, he ran a nonprofit to increase prosthetic accessibility in rural India. And we realized how bad the control systems and the functionality and the experience that amputees had with prosthetics currently were. And that issue, stretches much beyond just the prosthetics industry, where our plan and our vision as a company is to build out a foundational model, an operating system to encode motor movement from the brain, the EEG, your brainwave signals that correspond to motor movement, to everyday actions. This is going to be translated to neurorehabilitation and therapy for people who may have stroke and seizures. It can be translated to the robotics field with exoskeleton manipulation and control for, say, the government or augmenting people's joints, or even direct prosthetics, which is the area that we see is most critical to attack first. And it even has applications in AR, VR, and the consumer electronic space. And that's our broad vision. Now, the good thing is that academia and industry, it's two separate things, right? A lot of people are focused in academia on doing this, in a very clinical setting, not as robust. And academia also is more interested, from what I've seen, in proving novelty. So it's always, what's the new method? What can we do? And the EEG field in academia has become slightly saturated with those kinds of papers. And so we are focused on practical execution of what's been done in academia in the past, and then B, also improving the effectiveness of existing methods as much as possible. We don't need the shiny new object on the table, right? We need what we know works, working at maximum efficiency.
I like that a lot. Just focusing on the actual operation. That's fantastic. And little plug for you guys. I'm gonna include in the show notes and also in the outro, but make sure to check out Morph Technologies. I've looked into it more. What you guys are working with is absolutely fantastic. And I think it's something that all listeners should take a look at. And also your story, right? And I kind of want to jump in on that. So you mentioned you guys all sought to continue this after college, despite offers to pursue a PhD or go into potentially a full-time position. Everyone has different experiences when it comes to taking those risks, and it's hard to gauge a lot of times on when it's the right time, right? And so I wanted to ask you, how should students assess whether they're in the right position to take that leap? For example, the leap of pursuing a startup full time.
Yeah, absolutely. That is the question at hand. I think for myself, it personally clicked over winter break, right? And part of it's, am I ready to take this full time, right? And then the other half is, what do I need to take this full time, right? So when winter break came around, I was more so thinking around the lines that I love this idea, but I don't know what it means for me to take this full time. I had no idea if it was a possibility, if it was a reality, if it was something that could happen. And then I sort of did planning from there. Okay, if I wanted to take this full time, A, where does the company need to be from a traction perspective, right? What kind of business do we need to have? What kind of interest do we need to have? What is the business development that needs to have, right? And what's the technical progress we need to make towards our MVP in order for that to be a reality for me to take this full time, take it beyond just an idea or a college hobby or project. And then the second is, from a monetary perspective, okay, how much money do we need to take this full time for me to be able to live and work on this? Now, obviously, early days starting a company, you hear this cliche all the time, but a little bit's true is the luxuries that, we're used to, a lot of those aren't there. I mean, most of them outside of work right now, my life is basically just sleeping, eating, and then sometime exercising and then going to the gym. But those are sort of the two avenues I looked at. Technically, what needs to happen in order for this to be like a feasible product and business that will operate? And then monetarily, what needs to come our way in order for this to be something I can continue to work on? And so I sort of, over winter break my senior year, sat down and really thought about what it'll take to make this full time. And then sort of the way you tackle any other problem, define metrics for what I need and what my co-founders need to be able to survive and work on this for a couple months before we raise a proper institutional round, or if we needed to raise earlier, right? How much money we need to take this full time. And then B, what kind of business development progress and technical progress do we need for this to go beyond a lab or beyond a college project? And then I spent up until March and April working on that and making the possibility of taking this full time a reality. Just crossing off those metrics and working towards those while I was still in school. That way, when the time came and I graduated, it was more than possible and actually beneficial for me to take that leap in terms of what the opportunity would do for me.
Definitely. And I really like how you broke that down into different parts that our listeners and just students in general can kind of assess. And looking into that, I've personally heard, the horror stories of kind of reckless decision making, people jumping into something, taking a full-time role on a startup that there's no, proof of traction, proof of concept, you know, beyond including, but also beyond the idea of just taking a full-time position, looking at the whole scope of just taking risk. How would you define the difference between smart risk and reckless decision making in this space?
Yeah, so I think that comes from two things. One is the emotion side of it, right? That's very common. That's something we're all working. Like I'm working on it myself. Like taking the emotion out of a lot of the decision making. Because this beats you hard. You will talk to somebody. They'll be like, "Oh my God, your idea is garbage," right? Why are you even building this? And then you have to step back, take the emotion out of it, understand where they're coming from, their perspective. But the other aspect that I think separates it from being reckless to being a possibility, like a risk that you're diving into taking, is, or at least for us, was going and figuring out externally, doing large amounts of customer discovery, right? So it's not just this is a cool idea I have and I'm going to build it, because that validation is not there. We don't know if people, like, if I just said, hey, I'm going to make a cool, brain foundational model that controls a robotic hand or a prosthetic, that's not validated yet. Like even with just that, even if I was building it myself and I had the technology, making a decision, hey, I'm turning down my job offer, right? For that, in my eyes, would have still been a reckless decision for me. So what we did is we ended up talking with call after call after call, amputee after amputee after amputee, prostheticist after prostheticist after prostheticist, and validated that there was a demand for what we were working on. Right?
Right.
Will people buy it if it works the way we envision it working? Right? And that's what I think separates it from being reckless to it being a risk to take, right? Is there a market for it, or is this just a cool idea?
Hmm. And looking into that, you know, when you're looking at validation from your customer base and your addressable market, there's obviously going to be, for the most part, a lot of noise. There's going to be there could be a large skew for your technology or for your startup, but there also it's inevitable there are going to be some, whether those are company investors or just people out there that could criticize whatever you're working on. And this kind of also plays into the idea that you mentioned about emotionally kind of controlling how you go about things. How have you kind of dealt with times where uncertainty or people's opinions of criticism have really played a role and gotten to your core and maybe made you even potentially even question whether your decision was the right one?
Yeah. So for me, the way I've dealt with it, and we're still early stage, and I know a lot more rejections and no's are going to come in the future. It's only the start of the whole ups and downs journey. But for me, it's been taking two things into account. One, what's the person's relevance to the problem, right? If these are actual stakeholders that our product is going to affect, their opinions, whether negative or positive, matter a lot, especially the negative ones, right? If an amputee basically comes back to us and says your prosthetic is garbage, right? That's a pretty big deal because that's our target customer saying they would never touch what we built, right? If it's some random guy from down the street that has no affiliation with the problem, has no understanding of what we're building, and has no idea of the perspective of the target market, that's just noise, right? And so outside of that, it's working with the people that should care with our solution, that we want to care with our solution, that will need our solution, and making sure that we're optimizing for them. So for that, bad or good, we toss the emotions aside and we build and adapt based off their requirements. Right? If we're building for amputees, everything that the amputee says matters. If our EEG interface is too uncomfortable, that matters. That's not noise. We have to pay attention to listen to that. Right? If the prosthetic hand, right, if it's bulky or uncomfortable, we have to listen to that. Right? But the Joe Schmo down the street, the people that don't see the vision, grant that we have the customer validation, that we have the demand, right? It's just about getting the relevant stakeholders on that side, investors, to understand and see how much people need it. And if there's no stake in the company or the business or anything at all, then there's nothing to pay attention to there.
Definitely. So it's just scoping down the opinions you take based on who's actually relevant to whatever you're working on, right?
Pretty much, exactly, yeah. Focus on the people that matter, whether it's good or bad, and take that in and try and build and make them happy. And then everybody else is, sort of cast to the side. They don't matter to us.
Very well said. No, 100%. I've personally had my own fair share of experiences, both anecdotally and also just seeing others, not being able to cancel out that noise. It's very dangerous when you take noise as actual feedback and criticisms that you should follow. So I think that's a very, very key takeaway, if anything, from this episode for our listeners to keep that in mind. And you mentioned a point about how for you, this is just the beginning for all the ups and downs, right? It's like like you said, it's very uncertain. The road from here forward is very volatile and it's unpredictable for the most part, right? Obviously, there's the things you can do, but there are also the things you can't. And for students that are at the point where they have the validation and they know that this is something that they are willing and logically makes sense to go down the full-time path, a lot of them could face the fear that comes with all the ups and downs that will come in the future. How have you personally dealt with this, and how would you kind of consult students that are feeling the same way?
Yeah, I mean, that there's no way around just developing resilience, right? I mean, it's, for us, one day our entire code base breaks, nothing works. The very next day, we have massive technical traction, right? One day we talk with the professor who says, oh, your solution will never work. And then the next day we find 10 papers that say this is the only way forward to expand and grow upon what's been done. And so if the validation is there, if the technical feasibility is there, it's about remembering the mission and keeping the progress forward. Keep chugging, keep chugging. Days will be good, days will be bad, but we just have to move forward, right?
Definitely. It kind of ties back to your past point, just, not letting the noise kill you in many ways. And so I wanted to hear, so we've been talking a lot about the idea of taking a full-time route as a major risk, but, going into other risks, if not maybe smaller risks that you see more on a day-to-day, weekly, monthly basis, how do you identify whether that risk, whether it's a business risk or just personal risk in regards to doing this startup, how do you identify whether it's worth taking?
Yeah. I think the big thing for us right now with how early we are is, monetary risk is that's what we're evaluating, right? Because where we're at right now, pre-revenue, no sales yet, although we have LOIs that we're building, letters of intent. But the big thing is the monetary risk. And so it's with every decision we're making, seeing, hey, what's the worst possible outcome? We spend all this money and it sucks, right? My co-founder, he goes to New York for an event. We pay, and we have him interact with clinics and all of this stuff. Is that, worth the expense is spending money on this new board circuitry design, right? If the worst case scenario doesn't work out, oh man, what's the odds there, right? And taking almost, in probability, it's like there's like a triangle distribution where it's the best case scenario, worst case scenario, most likely scenario, her highest, lowest, and most likely. And so it's kind of defining that and then evaluating whether or not it's a good decision based off the most likely and worst case scenarios.
Got it. So it's all about breaking it down, you would say, and then looking
Yeah.
at it from a top-down view. Okay, that makes
Yeah,
a lot
yeah,
of
yeah.
sense. And I didn't even think about this previously, just the idea that you were working with co-founders when you made the decision to go full time. How did that conversation go about? Was that something that you guys were all in tune with, or was that something, you need a little bit of nudging? How do you go about a conversation like that?
Yeah, so that's actually something that's, I think, a little bit unique about me and the team is that all of us wanted to, at some point early in our career, go build something ourselves, right? And that's how we all met. We were all on co-founder matching platform, right? And so we knew somewhere down in our tracks. We knew sometime down the line, we all wanted to build something ourselves. So it's more so about having the conversation, is this something we can build now, right? And the second thing is what I mentioned earlier, all of us sat down and said, what do we need to take this full time for each of our given situations? Very open, very upfront. So what I really like about the team is that we're all 100% straight up with each other. We know it's for the best, both for each of us individually succeeding and the company succeeding. So we don't sugarcoat much at all. We're always straight up speaking about what'll be the best for both of those situations for everybody. And we went ahead and we had that conversation right away because we knew we all wanted it at some point. It was very simple. Are you ready to take the leap now? What do you need to be able to take the leap? And what do we all need to take the leap together? And that was sort of the conversation we ended up having.
Definitely. And when you say that point of taking the leap together, did you find any sort of comfort in the idea that you're taking this leap not alone and you're doing it with other people? Is that something that students can look forward to when they have co-founders and they're taking a risk like that? Or was it just, could you imagine it being relatively the same if it was just yourself?
Yeah, it's 100% was an easier decision to make given that I have two people that are also equally as invested as me. I think Y Combinator and a lot of people put out there that, you know, you should have a co-founder, right? Because it helps share the load, share the distribution, share the stakes. And they always say having good co-founders is better than having no co-founders, but no co-founders is better than bad co-founders. But if you find the right people, it does make all the difference. It helps split up the work. So, amongst three co-founders, we have, our business head is doing all the sales, strategy, and regulatory work right now. We have a hardware design co-founder who's doing all the physical work, and then I'm running all the software work. And so it really helps as opposed to having one person doing all three. Timelines extend and all of that stuff, and work might not get done. But having other people made it much more, it was a much easier decision to make than doing this all on my own with no infrastructure, no support, and nobody else involved or with stakes than me. My process would have still been the same, but it's not just me right now trying to keep the ship afloat. We've got two other people who are also working as hard as they can to take this thing to the stars.
Yeah, honestly, I think that's a really good point. And it's kind of Like you said, it's another great point to push people to kind of get into that co-founder space. Like you said, YC matching processes, those platforms, I think it's amazing for our listeners. Honestly, I'll include those in the show notes as well if anyone's interested. And so kind of wrapping up some final takeaways and key advice. I always ask my guests to imagine themselves speaking with a student in regards to the topic at hand. And so if you're talking to a student who's in college right now and is thinking about taking that risk but wants to wait for the right time, what advice would you give them about the idea about taking it at the right time?
So there's kind of two things, right? One is, and everybody says this, right? I'm not the only person, but there's no right time. Just start now, start building and see what happens, right? You're a student, try things out. People will help you. People will love to see it, right? And the other piece, connected with that is, my whole, I think my philosophy is basically dream big, work hard, be delusional, and learn from everybody. And just sort of keep that mentality. Dream as big as you can. Like, don't be like rash and emotional and have like I want to build a rocket to fly to the moon and then just go do it and say that's what I'm doing full time. But with that mindset, dream big, work hard, be delusional, and learn from everyone. It's the mindset of not I can't climb Mount Everest, right? It's the mindset of what would it take for me to be able to climb Mount Everest, define those constraints or requirements, and then start working towards them if, Mount Everest is one of my goals, right? Not write myself off because I think I don't have any of the qualifications, but always pursue every angle as what does it take to make this a reality, and then work from there.
Definitely. So to all of our listeners that's having those questions, that's the perfect answer to any of your concerns. And kind of expanding beyond the scope of this episode, for all of our listeners, where can they follow your work and also Morph and learn more about Morph and the work that you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you want to stay updated with our journey, Morph Labs on LinkedIn, morphlabs.tech is our website. And we're also morphlabs.ai on Instagram as well. So that's where you guys can stay updated, see the journey, and follow what's happening.
Awesome. And to all our listeners, I'll include those all in the show notes as well, and on any links where you'll see this episode published and advertised. Well, Soham, thank you so much for the incredible episode. This was an amazing episode for not only our listeners, but for myself. I mean, this is something that I think everyone can take at least one point home with them that they personally feel resonates with them in their current situation. So I really appreciate your time and all of your insight, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me, Zaggy. This has been an absolute pleasure.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. You have a good one, Soham.
All right. Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye. All right. That wraps up this episode of Dorman Ventures. Huge thanks to Soham for joining us and breaking down what it really means to take meaningful risks as a student founder and how to know when you're ready to bet on yourself. Per usual, before we close out, here are 3 main takeaways to keep in mind beyond this episode. The first one is the best time is now, right? College gives you the rare freedom to experiment without high financial stakes. Use this time to test bold ideas, learn fast, and build something real before life gets a little more complicated. The second is validate before you leap. Don't quit your day job or decline job offers unless you've seen real traction. Validation from real users or customers is what separates smart risk taking from reckless decisions. And the last is focus on relevant feedback. Listen, it's easy to get lost in the noise, but not all advice is equal. Prioritize input from the people closest to your product's success, customers, mentors, and partners who are actually involved in the building process with you. All right. Thank you all again for tuning in. If this episode helped you think differently about risk, share it with a friend and follow along for more stories from the next generation of builders. All right. Until next time, this is Dorman Ventures.